Hey guys, tonight we're not talking about castles, knights, or heroic battles. No, we're going somewhere quieter, holier, and significantly sweatier. Welcome to Thoth's Moon Temple. Forget divine wisdom or cosmic mysteries. You're not here to learn sacred truths. You're here as the lowest ranked servant, which means your enlightenment is about discovering how heavy an amphora of Nile water really is. Congratulations. Your soul has officially been downgraded to unpaid intern of eternity. The first thing you notice is the smell. Not incense, not flowers, though both are burning in awkward excess, but the smell of too many people trapped in stone walls with no airflow. Imagine mixing candle, smoke, bird droppings, sweat, and something that might be a goat, but could also be divine punishment. That's your new perfume. Forget sandalwood oil. You smell like holy mildew. The temple itself looks impressive from the outside. Giant columns, walls, carved with hieroglyphs of gods and stars. But as a servant, you don't get to admire the architecture. You get to scrub the bird poop off the stairs leading up to it. And those stairs are endless. You climb them every day, barefoot, carrying jars, tools, and regrets. By the time you reach the top, you've basically completed a half marathon while balancing someone else's groceries. Inside, the priests glide around in spotless linen robes, looking very spiritual. Do they ever lift a hand to keep those robes clean? Absolutely not. That's where you come in, wrestling laundry against rough stone basins until your knuckles bleed. The priests chant prayers to Thoth, the god of wisdom. You chant curses at the soap that doesn't exist. Their voices echo beautifully through the halls. Yours echoes only in your own skull, as you wonder if you'll ever eat more than barley porridge again. And speaking of food, you don't get any of the sacred offerings. All those roasted ducks, baskets of figs, and jars of honey. You carry them into the inner sanctum, set them before the god, and then watch them vanish into the mouths of priests later. If you're lucky, maybe you'll get a crumb of stale bread that fell to the floor, assuming the temple cat didn't get it first. The gods feast. The priests nibble. You chew regret. At night, when rituals are done, you'd think you could rest. Wrong. You sleep in a corner of the servant quarters, a stone floor that doubles as a bug habitat. Your pillow is your elbow, and your blanket is the itchy linen tunic you've been sweating in all day. If the ibis bird honks at dawn, you're already late. There is no sleeping in when the moon god is your boss. So, welcome to Thoth's Moon Temple. Wisdom might be sacred here, but misery is shared equally. And guess what? You've only survived the introduction. The real suffering starts tomorrow. Thoth, the big boss of this whole operation, doesn't even show up in person. He's the god of wisdom, scribes, and the moon, which sounds glamorous until you realize he's basically the spiritual manager breathing down your neck forever. He's got the head of an ibis, a bird famous for poking around in mud. Yes, the universe's keeper of cosmic order looks like a cranky swamp bird, but you don't dare laugh, because mocking a god could get you reassigned to even worse work, like cleaning the crocodile temple down the river. The priests tell you every day how grateful you should be to serve Thoth. Of course, gratitude doesn't pay for sandals, nor does it stop your back from screaming after hauling sacred offerings uphill. But in theory, Thoth rewards wisdom, which means the scribes get all the divine credit. They sit in shaded halls, scribbling hieroglyphs on papyrus, nodding like they're decoding the universe, while you're outside sweeping pigeon droppings off the temple steps. If Thoth really cared about wisdom, he'd invent a mop. The rituals to honor him are endless. Morning, noon, night, always a chant, always a gesture, always another thing for you to clean afterward. The moon waxes, special ritual. The moon wanes, special ritual. The moon just sits there minding its business. Yep, special ritual. Each one involves incense, fire, food, chanting, and approximately 100 little tasks that somehow always land on your to-do list. Though these reputation as the god of scribes means the temple has libraries, scrolls, and walls full of carved hymns, do you get to read any of it? Absolutely not. You dust it, polish it, and carry it. But knowledge is reserved for the elite. You're the janitor of enlightenment, sweeping wisdom into piles you're never allowed to touch. And if you ever even peek too long at a papyrus scroll, some smug priest will remind you that your role is to carry buckets, not ideas. And yet, the pressure is real. If a ritual goes wrong, if the sacred bread is stale, if the candles burn unevenly, guess who gets blamed? Not the priests, who conveniently blame the disorder of the servant's heart. That's you. You're not just hauling jars. You're apparently spiritually responsible for cosmic order. One missed chore, and the moon might fall out of the sky. No pressure. By the end of the day, you've bowed, scrubbed, carried, and inhaled so much incense you're lightheaded. And still, Thoth doesn't show up to say thanks. His statue stares down at you with carved eyes that never blink. A permanent reminder that you're just a replaceable background character in the god's eternal screenplay. You'd think being noticed by a god would be inspiring. Instead, it's exhausting. And the worst part? Tomorrow night, when the moon rises, the whole thing starts again. Eternal wisdom apparently requires eternal chores. From a distance, Thoth's moon temple looks impressive. Massive stone columns, walls etched with hieroglyphs glowing in moonlight, and giant statues staring into eternity. If you were a wide-eyed tourist or one of those smug priests, it might even feel magical. But you, the servant? You're not living inside a spiritual wonderland. You're living inside a giant stone oven with bad acoustics. The reality is that temples aren't built for comfort. They're built to look intimidating and to echo chants dramatically, which means every step you take echoes forever. Every cough sounds like a crime, and every dropped jar of beer becomes the loudest mistake in Egypt. And because windows weren't really a design priority, ventilation is non-existent. Between the oil lamps, the incense, and the sweaty bodies packed inside for ceremonies, the air feels less like divine atmosphere, and more like being locked in a smoky tomb. The priests, of course, never admit this. They tell visitors the temple is a sacred reflection of cosmic harmony. Meanwhile, you're choking on incense smoke, scrubbing black stains off limestone, and wondering how cosmic harmony manages to smell like goat dung mixed with mold. And if you thought the priests were going to help clean, wrong. They're too busy chanting, writing, or pretending their linen robes aren't covered in yesterday's grease stains. The temple also has this constant low hum of sound. Not mystical, just annoying. The oil lamps hiss. The drums thump. The sacred ibis birds honk at random hours. And when the priests chant, they do it loudly enough to rattle your bones. It's supposed to connect humans to the divine. But when you're sweeping ashes out of the corners, it just feels like background noise to your eternal janitorial nightmare. And don't expect Hogwarts-style common rooms with cozy fires and magical staircases. Your quarters are basically the leftovers of temple design, small, dark cubbyholes at the edge of the complex. The floor is hard stone. The bedding, if you're lucky, is a thin mat woven from reeds. And it's never just yours. The other servants crowd around, snoring, coughing, scratching fleas, and muttering about quitting, though everyone knows nobody ever quits. The bugs alone could form their own priesthood at this point. But the real heartbreak is that visitors imagine this temple is a place of mystery and wisdom. They think priests spend their days unlocking secrets of the cosmos, while the moon god whispers into their ears. In truth, most of the mystery involves someone misplacing a jar of honey or arguing over whether the incense should be burned clockwise or counterclockwise. The closest you get to cosmic revelation is figuring out which corner the rats have decided to invade this week. And yet, despite all this, you're reminded constantly that the temple is sacred ground, that every crack in the wall, every symbol carved into stone is filled with divine significance. Maybe that's true. But when you're hunched over with a bucket of Nile water, scrubbing floors until your wrists ache, the divine feels suspiciously like ordinary back pain. The moon temple isn't Hogwarts. It's not magical, it's not cozy, and it doesn't hand you destiny in a fancy letter. It hands you dirty laundry, sore knees, and a lifetime supply of spiritual chores. Every temple servant dreams of doing something important, maybe carrying sacred scrolls, maybe preparing offerings, maybe even assisting in a ritual that looks impressive enough to brag about in the afterlife. But no, your destiny is laundry. Not your own, not your neighbors, but the sacred laundry of priests and gods. which somehow counts as holy work, even though it looks exactly like scrubbing stained sheets by hand until your fingers wrinkle like raisins. The linen robes the priests wear might look crisp and pure during ceremonies, fluttering in the torchlight as they chant. But you know the truth. They're filthy. Sweat stains, food dribbles, incense ash. It all sticks to white linen like divine glue. And because Egypt is basically a furnace 9 months out of the year, those robes are soaked through with sweat by breakfast. Who gets to clean them? Not the priests. Definitely not Thoth. Just you, armed with a basin, a chunk of natron, and your steadily collapsing will to live. Linen is supposed to symbolize purity, but it doesn't feel pure when you're beating it against stone until your shoulders feel like they've dislocated. Each wash takes hours. You haul water from the Nile in clay jars that weigh as much as small children, slosh half of it onto your legs, and then kneel by the basin scrubbing while mosquitoes bite your ankles. Meanwhile, the priests stroll by in fresh robes, giving you side-eye if even one stain remains, as though they personally had nothing to do with spilling honey on themselves during the morning feast. And laundry never ends. There is no day when the robes stay clean. Every ritual means incense ash drifting down like divine dandruff. Every feast means wine stains. Every summer afternoon means sweat pouring into seams. You could spend an entire day washing, and by nightfall it looks like you never touched the pile. The robes come back to you again, heavier, dirtier, more insulting. It's a cosmic cycle. Except instead of the waxing and waning of the moon, it's the eternal waxing and staining of linen. Sometimes the priests will tell you that washing robes is holy, that you are helping cleanse not just fabric, but also the spiritual impurities of the temple. Which sounds poetic until you realize they're basically saying your life purpose is being the divine washing machine. You're not channeling wisdom. You're scrubbing armpits. The gods are eternal. Your laundry pile is, too. The worst part is the drying. After hours of work, you string the robes on ropes across the courtyard, only for a sudden gust of desert wind to blow dust all over them again. Or worse, the sacred ibis decides the rope is a perfect perch and leaves his own contribution right in the middle of your freshly washed cloth. Nothing makes you question faith faster than watching a bird undo 3 hours of back-breaking work in a single squawk. By the time night falls, your hands are raw, your shoulders ache, and your legs tremble from hauling water all day. And the robes you washed will be filthy again by sunrise. The priests will smile, bow before Thoth, and stride into rituals looking radiant. You'll stand in the shadows, smelling of wet fabric and mosquito bites, wondering if the moon god truly understands what you sacrificed today. Sacred laundry is supposed to symbolize purity, but all it really symbolizes is your endless exhaustion. If you thought the sacred laundry was endless, wait until you meet the temple floors. From the outside, they look impressive. Smooth limestone or polished marble, gleaming in the sunlight, covered with carved symbols that scream cosmic importance. But from your vantage point, crouched with a brush in one hand and a sore back, they're less like holy ground and more like a giant, dusty platter for every shoe, paw, and sandal in Egypt. The first problem? Incense ash. Priests burn incense constantly. It's supposed to carry prayers upward, connecting heaven and earth, but most of it just falls downward, coating the floor like divine dandruff. You sweep it up, only for more to fall during the next chant. Every corner of the temple smells faintly of burnt herbs and crushed sandalwood, but mostly it just looks like a fireplace exploded. Then there's the issue of animals. Sacred ibis birds strut around like they own the place, leaving droppings exactly where worshippers bow. Cats, which are supposed to be protectors of sacred spaces, treat the floors like their personal racetrack, scattering dirt, feathers, and the occasional half-dead mouse. Rats sneak in at night, nibbling grain offerings and leaving little gifts for you to scrub in the morning. For all its cosmic alignment, the temple floor is basically a petting zoo without the charm. And don't forget pilgrims. They shuffle in barefoot, sweaty from long journeys, tracking sand, mud, and who knows what across the supposedly pristine space. Every grain of sand sticks in the cracks of carved hieroglyphs, and yes, you're the one bent over with a stick trying to pry it out. The priests claim those carvings hold divine meaning. You claim they hold enough dirt to start a small farm. Water doesn't help. You haul jars from the Nile to rinse the floors, but the water mixes with ash and dust, creating a sludge that stains instead of cleans. By midday, your knees are caked in mud, your hands are pruned from scrubbing, and your back feels like it belongs to someone 20 years older. And still, the floor looks fine, not spotless, never spotless. The priests don't see the struggle. They glide across the stones during rituals, acting as though the gleaming surface appeared by divine will. If a pilgrim comments on how polished the floor looks under moonlight, the priests nod smugly, as though they personally scrubbed it. You're invisible until the moment a stain shows, then suddenly, everyone notices. The purity of the temple is compromised. A priest will declare, glaring at you, while you're still holding the brush you've been using for 6 straight hours. At night, when the chants are over and the torches go out, you sometimes lie down on the same floor you've been cleaning. It's not comfortable. The stone is cold, the surface uneven, and your body feels heavier than the jars you carried all day. But there's nowhere else to collapse. You stare up at the ceiling, smelling the incense that never goes away, wondering how you became a custodian of cosmic dust. The irony is brutal. This floor is supposed to connect the mortal world to the divine, a bridge between humans and gods. But to you, it's just another chore, one that will repeat tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Because floors in temples never stay clean, they just wait patiently for you to crawl back on your knees and start over. In Thoth's temple, the scribes are treated like rock stars. They're the chosen few who get to sit cross-legged in shaded halls, dipping their delicate reed pens into ink and scratching divine wisdom onto papyrus. Everyone whispers about how sacred their work is, how their words preserve cosmic truth, how they're practically co-writing eternity with the gods themselves. Meanwhile, you're outside, hauling water, sweeping ash, and wondering why eternity always smells like wet limestone and bird droppings. The difference in status is insulting. Scribes are allowed to speak in the rituals, their voices echoing like holy instruments. You're allowed to carry buckets, your footsteps echoing like background noise. They're praised for their gentle hands, while you nurse blisters from dragging amphorae across stone courtyards. They're seen as vessels of divine knowledge. You're seen as the vessel of whatever chore hasn't been done yet. Their tools are neat palettes, brushes, papyrus sheets. Yours are bruises, scratches, and the permanent ache in your lower back. They sip watered-down wine during their breaks. You're lucky if you get a gulp of Nile water without a mosquito larva floating in it. When they mess up a scroll, it's blamed on the fickleness of the gods. When you mess up sweeping a corner, it's blamed on your laziness and moral weakness. And the worst part? You have to clean up after them. Spilled ink doesn't magically vanish because it's sacred. It drips onto the temple floors, splatters onto their robes, and somehow always finds its way into your daily workload. You're the one scrubbing black stains off limestone, while the scribe sighs dramatically about how the gods tested his patience today. Tested his patience. As if he knows the meaning of patience when the heaviest thing he's lifted all week is a reed pen. The priests always claim scribes are closest to Thoth. After all, he's the god of wisdom and writing. But from your perspective, they're just men with better handwriting and less sunburn. They sit in the shade, inventing metaphors about the moon, while you carry their ink jars, sweep their scraps of papyrus, and try not to scream every time one of them calls you boy or girl, like you're 5 years old and not a full-grown adult with joints older than the moon phases. Sometimes, in your rare moments of rest, you imagine switching places. You, sitting in the cool hall, brush in hand, writing down prayers. Them hauling buckets from the Nile, sweating through their linen, cursing at mosquitoes. You imagine it, but it never happens. Wisdom may be divine, but hierarchy is permanent. Scribes stay scribes, servants stay servants. That's how Thoth apparently designed it. By the end of the day, when your palms are raw and your back feels like a bent reed, you look at the scribes filing away their scrolls, smiling as though they've just reshaped the universe. And maybe they have, in ink. But you've reshaped your hands into calluses. Their glory is carved into papyrus. Yours is carved into your skin. Sacrifices in Thoth's temple are supposed to be grand affairs. Pilgrims imagine golden altars, glowing candles, priests chanting cosmic hymns, while offerings rise like smoke to the heavens. But for you, the servant, sacrifices are basically just catering for a party you're not invited to. The gods demand food, lots of it. Loaves of bread, jars of beer, roasted ducks, fresh fruit, honey, dates, onions, garlic, everything delicious you never get to eat. You're the delivery system. The priests recite poetry about how sacred the offerings are, while you stagger under the weight of baskets filled with figs. And figs aren't light. They multiply. By the time you've hauled the fourth basket up the temple stairs, you're convinced the tree outside is mocking you personally. The preparation isn't glamorous either. You don't get to toss bread into a sacred oven with dramatic flair. You're in the smoky back kitchen, kneading dough until your arms cramp, grinding barley while dust clogs your throat, fetching water when someone tips a jar over. The divine feast looks elegant by the time it reaches the altar, but behind the scenes it's just you and a few other servants, half choking in a haze of flour and regret. Once the food is prepared, you lug it all to the inner sanctum. Priests glide alongside, chanting solemnly, but not touching anything heavy. That's your job. They act as though placing a single fig on the altar is exhausting, while you've been carrying enough to feed an entire village. The worst part? You can smell it. The honey glistening, the duck steaming, the bread crusts golden, but none of it touches your lips. After the ritual, priests scoop it away and tuck into the feast themselves. By the time you're done cleaning trays and bowls, the only thing left is crumbs, and maybe, if the sacred cat is distracted, you might snag one. Sacrifices are also messy. Blood sacrifices leave trails across the floor. You scrub those trails, not them. Oil drips from lamps, staining robes. You wash those stains, not them. Beer sloshes from jars during chants. You mop it, not them. The gods never complain about the mess, but the priests always do. The irony of it all is unbearable. The offering is meant for Thoth, the god of wisdom, yet somehow the priests always manage to intercept it first. Thoth gets honored, the priests get dinner, and you get sore shoulders and the privilege of scraping bones into waste baskets while everyone else wipes grease from their mouths. At the end of a sacrifice, when the incense smoke has cleared and the chanting has faded, you stand there with the broom in your hand, staring at the empty altar. The gods have been fed, the priests have been fed, and you're still hungry. You trudge back to the servant quarters, where your bowl of cold barley porridge waits like punishment. To outsiders, sacrifices look holy. To you, they just look like meal prep you'll never taste. The priests like to talk about fasting as though it's noble. They call it purification, a way of cleansing the soul before rituals, a holy act of discipline. But let's be clear, when you're a servant, fasting isn't a choice. It's just starving with extra steps. During a ritual fast, priests announce they'll abstain from food to honor Thoth. Sounds impressive, except they usually still sneak honey cakes or sip watered beer when no one's looking. You, on the other hand, have nothing to sneak. Your bowl of barley gruel has already been cut in half for the purification schedule. The priests get hungry in an elegant, symbolic way. You get hungry in a way that makes your stomach growl loud enough to echo in the temple halls. The official servant meal is always the same. Thin porridge made from barley ground into dust and mixed with water. It has the consistency of wet sand and the flavor of sadness. Sometimes, if you're lucky, someone tosses in a wilted onion leaf for variety. Most days, though, it's just the pale grey sludge. You eat quickly, not because it's delicious, but because the faster you swallow, the less time your tongue has to register the taste. Meanwhile, you're surrounded by food you're not allowed to touch. You carry platters of fruit into the sanctum, haul roasted ducks dripping with fat, and watch priests sip honey-sweet beer while lecturing about restraint. You scrape crumbs from the floor, the scent clinging to your hands, the juices running down your arms, knowing none of it belongs to you. Fasting is supposed to connect mortals with the divine. For you, it connects hunger pangs with bitterness. The work doesn't stop during fasting either. In fact, it gets harder. Empty stomachs mean heavier baskets, longer stairs, sharper aches in your joints. You haul water jars until your arms shake, Sweep floors until your knees burn. Polish statues while your vision blurs from dizziness. The priests call it discipline. You call it fainting in slow motion. At night, when the rituals are done, you retreat to the servant quarters and hope sleep will smother the hunger. It doesn't. Hunger follows you into dreams. You dream of bread, soft, warm, crusty bread, only to wake up with a mouthful of air and another bowl of watery mush waiting for you. The priests break their fasts with feast. You break yours by realizing it was never voluntary. The cruelest part? Fasting is praised. Priests tell you that going without food makes you closer to Thoth, that hunger sharpens the mind and purifies the soul. But you don't feel pure. You feel weak, angry, and convinced that if Thoth really valued wisdom, he'd invent a snack. In the end, fasting isn't holy for you. It's just the daily reminder that the gods feast, the priests nibble, and you, the servant who carries it all, chew only on emptiness. If there's one smell that defines the moon temple, it isn't honey cakes or roasted duck, it's incense. The priests burn it constantly. Morning rituals, incense. Evening prayers, incense. Random Tuesday afternoon when nothing is happening, more incense. It's supposed to purify the temple air, sending prayers upward in fragrant clouds. But for you, the servant stuck inside all day, it feels less like holiness and more like inhaling a bonfire of herbs until your lungs give up. The recipes are elaborate. Priests grind frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and a dozen other expensive imports, mixing them into little cones or pellets that sizzle when thrown onto hot coals. The first few minutes almost smell nice, like spiced honey drifting through the halls. But then the smoke thickens, clinging to your nose, coating your throat, stinging your eyes. By the time you've carried 3 trays past a burning brazier, your vision is blurry, and your head is pounding like a drum. Incense is sacred to Thoth, but it's torture to you. You sweep ashes while coughing, polish statues with watery eyes, and haul water jars while your chest wheezes like an old bellows. The priests don't notice. They stand serenely, swaying to the rhythm of chants, breathing the same smoke as you, except they get to leave when it gets too thick. You don't. You're stuck inside, scrubbing the black stains left on the walls and floors after the sacred bonfire dies down. The temple isn't ventilated either. With its high ceilings and sealed stone walls, smoke just sits there, curling and circling until it settles into your hair, your clothes, your skin. After hours, you smell less like a servant and more like a walking incense cone. Other servants joke that they could light your tunic and it would burn evenly for hours. You don't laugh, mostly because they're probably right. Even worse, incense attracts pests. The smoke is supposed to drive away insects and evil spirits, but somehow it doesn't. Flies still buzz around offerings, mosquitoes still bite your ankles, and you're pretty sure the rats don't care if the air smells like cinnamon. What incense does chase away is oxygen. You stumble through your chores lightheaded, feeling as though you're halfway between the mortal world and the afterlife without the perks of either. And then there's the endless ash. Every ritual leaves little grey piles scattered across the temple, like confetti from a depressing party. It clings to robes, drifts into food, and mixes with sweat until your skin feels like sandpaper. By evening, your hands are blackened, your nose is raw, and your chest feels heavy. You wonder if Thoth, in all his wisdom, might one day invent an air window. To outsiders, incense makes the temple feel mysterious, divine, otherworldly. But to you, it's just another job hazard like slipping on spilled beer or getting pecked by the sacred ibis. The magical smell doesn't lift your spirit. It just makes you dizzy, dirty, and desperate for fresh air. When you work in Thoth's moon temple, the moon isn't just something pretty in the sky. It's your time clock. Ordinary people live by the sun, wake at dawn, rest at dusk. Simple, predictable. But not you. You live by the waxing and waning of the moon, which means your work schedule is about as steady as a sand dune in the wind. Each phase of the moon demands its own set of rituals. New moon, special prayers. Waxing crescent, extra offerings. Full moon, brace yourself. It's like New Year's Eve, but with more incense and fewer happy drunks. Waning moon, more chanting, more sweeping, more hauling of jars. Every night, Something must be honored, polished, or scrubbed in rhythm with the lunar calendar. Your body doesn't care if the moon is hiding or shining. Your body just wants sleep. But sleep, like wisdom, is reserved for the priests. The full moon is the worst. The temple fills with chanting, drumming, and endless lines of worshippers. Torches blaze in every corner, filling the halls with smoke. You rush between rooms carrying baskets of bread, jars of beer, and trays of fruit, trying not to trip over pilgrims kneeling on the floor. The priests lift their arms toward the glowing orb in the sky, singing hymns about divine knowledge. You lift a mop, scrubbing the mud those pilgrims tracked in. By the end, the priests are glowing with spiritual triumph. You're glowing too, but only from sweat. The new moon isn't much better. Darkness is supposed to symbolize renewal, mystery, and rebirth. To you, it just means hauling more oil lamps around the temple so nobody crashes into a wall. And lamps drip. Wax and oil spill everywhere. You clean those spills. If a lamp tips over and scorches the floor, you get yelled at. If a lamp goes out during the ritual, you get blamed for not trimming the wick properly, even though you weren't the one holding it. The moon doesn't care if you're tired. It rises and falls, grows and shrinks, and every time it changes shape, your chores multiply. Priests talk about how the moon is a reflection of divine wisdom. You talk about how it's ruining your knees, and there are no weekends, no days off. When the moon is full, you work. When the moon is gone, you work. Even when it's just sitting there, doing nothing particularly interesting, there's still some minor ritual that requires incense, food, or cleaning. Your shifts don't end. They just roll into one another, like the moon phases themselves. Sometimes, late at night, you stand in the temple courtyard and look up at the moon. It does look beautiful, calm, glowing, perfect. For a moment, you almost understand why people worship it. Then you remember you're scheduled to wake before dawn to haul more water for the next ritual. The beauty fades quickly. The moon may wax and wane, but your exhaustion only waxes, and it never wanes. Every temple servant eventually realizes the statues aren't just decorations, they're roommates. Giant, stone roommates who stare at you all day, silently judging everything you do. And in Thoth's moon temple, there are a lot of them. You can't walk 3 steps without some carved ibis head glaring down, like it knows you forgot to scrub under the offering table. Cleaning these statues is your responsibility, which sounds simple until you actually try it. Stone collects dust. It collects soot from incense, oil stains from lamps, and fingerprints from pilgrims who can't resist touching divine wisdom with their sweaty hands. Every surface has to be spotless, gleaming in torchlight as if the gods themselves just stepped out of a celestial bath. That shine doesn't appear magically, it comes from you, kneeling with rags, scrubbing until your knuckles crack. The worst part is their size. These statues aren't modest little figurines, they're towering blocks of stone carved into ibis heads, baboons, or human forms, each one looming over you like a silent supervisor. Polishing the higher parts means climbing rickety ladders while balancing jars of water, praying you don't slip and crack your skull on the sacred limestone. Priests say the gods protect the faithful, but you suspect if you fall, the statue will just stare blankly while someone else takes your job. And the faces, oh, the faces. Thoth statues have those long ibis beaks, curved and sharp, always pointed in your direction. Their carved eyes follow you across the room, no matter where you move. You know it's just stone, but it feels like judgment. As you wipe soot from the beak, you can almost hear the statue whisper, "Pathetic mortal, you missed a spot." You polish faster, because the last thing you need is divine side-eye from a rock bird. It doesn't end with one statue, either. The temple is filled with them, small shrines, side halls, niches. Each godly form demands equal care. Ignore one, and you risk angering the priests, who act like dusty stone is a personal insult to Thoth. They tell you statues are vessels of divine presence, that every smear diminishes cosmic harmony. You tell yourself they're just rocks with high-maintenance egos. Cleaning takes hours, and no matter how much you scrub, the dust always comes back. Ash floats from incense, sand drifts in from the courtyard. Pilgrims touch everything again. It's like fighting the desert itself, pointless and eternal. By evening, your arms ache, your tunic is streaked with grime, and the statues look fine. Not radiant, not miraculous. Just fine. Of course, the priests still take credit, claiming the gods blessed the temple with purity. Meanwhile, you're still picking grit out of your fingernails. At night, when the torches are out and the halls go silent, you sometimes sneak a glance at the statues. They stand in the moonlight, shadows stretched across the floor, eyes carved to stare forever. You wonder if they ever blink in the dark, or if they just keep watching, silently judging your next mistake. Pilgrims arrive at Thoth's moon temple like sandstorms, loud, chaotic, and impossible to avoid. They travel for miles across the desert, desperate for blessings, wisdom, or maybe just a place to collapse after weeks of sunburn and camel blisters. The priests see them as proof of the temple's importance. You see them as mobile dirt dispensers. They shuffle in with cracked feet, calloused from the road, leaving streaks of dust across the supposedly sacred floor you polished 3 hours ago. Their robes, once white, now resemble rags dipped in mud. Some carry offerings, baskets of bread, jars of honey, live chickens, but most of it spills before it ever reaches the altar. You're left sweeping feathers out of the courtyard, while priests nod solemnly as though nothing happened. The noise is endless. Pilgrims weep, chant, and beg loudly for miracles. Babies cry, donkeys bray, old men cough like broken flutes. Their voices bounce off the temple walls until it feels like you're trapped inside a drum. Priests claim it's a chorus of devotion. You suspect it's just badly tuned chaos. And then comes the touching. Pilgrims love to touch everything. They smear sweaty palms over statues, lean against walls, press their foreheads to carved hieroglyphs. Each touch leaves a fresh layer of grime for you to scrub. Some even toss coins or scraps of cloth onto the floor as offerings, which conveniently get kicked around until they're trampled into the cracks. Every ritual ends with you on your knees, prying copper bits and chicken feathers out of sacred carvings. The smells are another ordeal. Imagine hundreds of people who haven't bathed in weeks, packed together in a stone hall with incense smoke and animal offerings. Add sweat, dust, and the occasional accident from a goat that wasn't properly tied, and you've got a divine aroma that could make even the gods gag. The priests sail through it all with serene faces, as if their noses don't work. You, meanwhile, are gagging quietly while mopping the puddle nobody wants to admit came from the donkey. But the worst part isn't the dirt, or the noise, or the smell. It's the gratitude. Pilgrims shower priests with thanks, bowing low and praising their wisdom. The same priests who haven't lifted a finger to clean the mess. Nobody thanks the servant who scrubbed the floors they just ruined or carried the offerings they just spilled. To the pilgrims, you don't exist. You're background furniture, invisible unless you make a mistake. When the crowds finally leave, the temple is wrecked. Trash in corners, ash thick in the air, footprints stamped across the polished floor. The priests retreat to their chambers, congratulating themselves on a successful ritual. And you're still standing there, broom in hand, staring at the destruction left behind, wondering how soon the next wave of pilgrims will arrive. And you already know the answer. Too soon. Always too soon. If you thought working in a temple meant silence, order, and calm spirituality, you clearly never met the sacred animals. On paper, they sound noble creatures chosen by the gods, symbols of wisdom, divine messengers. In reality, they're noisy, messy, and perfectly capable of making your life worse. Take the ibis, for example. Thoth's favorite bird. Elegant, white-feathered, long-curved beak. Very holy in artwork. Less holy when it's honking at sunrise and stealing offerings off the altar. These birds wander freely through the temple like they own it, leaving droppings everywhere, knocking over jars, and attacking anyone who gets too close to their nests. You've never known true humiliation until you've been pecked by a divine messenger while hauling bread past the courtyard. Then there are the baboons, Thoth's other sacred animal. In paintings, they sit calmly, gazing at the moon with serene faces. In real life, they shriek like banshees, chase each other around the temple steps, and grab anything that isn't nailed down. You once saw one snatch a priest's wig and run off into the desert with it, Funny in the moment, less funny when you were ordered to sprint after it. Spoiler. You didn't get the wig back. Cats are another story. Technically, they're sacred across Egypt, not just here. They're supposed to protect the temple from vermin, which they do, occasionally. The rest of the time, they lounge on offering tables, knock over oil lamps, and glare at you as if you're the intruder. The priests adore them, stroking their fur and calling them divine. You adore them less, mostly because one clawed through your only decent tunic last week. And don't forget the donkeys, goats, and geese brought in by pilgrims as offerings. They're supposed to symbolize abundance and devotion, but mostly they symbolize chaos. Donkeys bray during ceremonies, goats break loose and chew on scrolls, geese charge at your legs like feathered demons. You spend more time chasing animals than polishing statues, which feels less like serving the gods and more like running the world's worst petting zoo. The priests never deal with the animals. They smile, wave incense, and declare the creatures holy. You're the one sweeping feathers out of the sanctum, scrubbing droppings off the floors, and dodging claws, beaks, and hooves. If a baboon ruins a scroll, somehow you're blamed for not watching it closely enough. If an ibis topples a lamp, you're scolded for leaving it in the wrong place. It seems divine animals can do no wrong unless you happen to be standing nearby. And yet, pilgrims love them. They point at the ibises with awe, toss food at the baboons, kneel when a cat slinks past, convinced they've glimpsed divine wisdom in fur or feathers. You stand in the corner, broom in hand, wondering how wisdom can also smell this strongly of manure. Serving in the moon temple means you don't just serve gods and priests. You serve every feather, paw, and claw that wanders through the courtyard. And no one ever warned you that holiness could hiss, shriek, or bite. One of your never-ending chores in Thoth's moon temple is keeping the oil lamps burning. Sounds simple. Fill them. Light them. Done. Except nothing in a temple is ever simple. These lamps are everywhere, lining the halls, perched on altars, tucked into niches, scattered across the courtyard. Dozens of tiny flames flickering day and night, each one demanding oil, each one dripping with the promise of another mess you'll have to clean. The oil itself is the problem. Thick, sticky, and prone to spilling, it seeps into everything. One drop on the floor, and suddenly the sacred hall is a skating rink. The priests don't notice, gliding past in their linen robes like they're immune to gravity. You notice, because you're the one who nearly split your skull open carrying a full jar across the slick floor. When it spills on your tunic, it never comes out. When it spills on the statues, it leaves stains that take hours of scrubbing. And when it spills on the offerings, you're the one scolded for defiling the gifts. Lighting the lamps is just as tricky. Wicks must be trimmed exactly, flames coaxed carefully, smoke kept minimal. Too much smoke, and the priests complain that the air feels heavy. Too little flame, and they complain the gods can't see their prayers. You can't win. You crouch in the shadows, relighting lamps over and over, trying not to burn your fingers while priests declare how perfectly balanced the light is tonight. Spoiler, it's not perfect. You just have blisters, and the soot, endless soot. Lamps leave black trails up the walls and dark smudges on the ceilings. That soot doesn't vanish by miracle. You're the one climbing ladders with rags, coughing as you scrape grime off stone. It falls into your hair, your eyes, your mouth. By the time you finish one hall, another has already built up another layer. Priests claim the rising smoke symbolizes prayers ascending to heaven. You claim it symbolizes why your lungs feel like ash every morning. Oil lamps also attract insects. Moths fling themselves into flames with suicidal determination, leaving charred wings and burned bodies behind. Flies buzz in, stick to the oil, and die slowly, wriggling until you fish them out with a stick. Nothing screams divine atmosphere, quite like the stench of roasted moth. Of course, you're the one who has to clean it. And then there's the weight. Oil isn't light. Jars are heavy, slippery, and always seem to multiply. You haul them daily from storerooms to sanctums, sloshing half the contents onto your feet before you even make it to the altar. By night, your shoulders ache, your arms shake, and your tunic is permanently shiny. The priests stand in the glow of hundreds of little flames, praising the gods for the light, You stand in the shadows, covered in oil stains, hoping one day someone invents a torch that doesn't drip. The lamps are supposed to symbolize enlightenment. To you, they symbolize sore arms, greasy clothes, and a temple that never stops being sticky. The temple priests love to boast that Thoth's moon temple is built to withstand the ages, aligned perfectly with the heavens, its stones so precise that not even a blade of grass can grow between them. What they never mention is that sand doesn't care about precision. It gets in anyway, under doors, through cracks, blown across courtyards, carried in on every pilgrim's sandal. You spend half your life sweeping sand out of a building planted squarely in the middle of a desert. The irony is enough to choke you. No matter how early you start, the sand is always waiting. Tiny drifts gather overnight in corners and stairwells, like the desert crept in to remind you who's in charge. You sweep for hours, filling baskets and tossing them outside, only to watch the wind blow half of it back in before you've even put the broom down. Pilgrims shuffle past, trailing dunes behind them, while priests glide by without so much as lifting a finger. Somehow, the task of keeping a desert temple sand-free has fallen entirely on you, as if your broom has the power to change geography. The sand doesn't just sit politely on the floor either. It scratches across the polished stones, works its way into cracks of sacred carvings, and grinds itself into the knees of your tunic as you kneel to scrape it out. It coats offerings, sticks to oil lamps, and clogs the grooves of statues you polished yesterday. Priests will point to a faint smear of grit on Thoth's beak and scold you for neglect, as though you personally invited the desert inside. And sand hurts. It slices your skin into tiny cuts, lodges in your fingernails, and rubs your feet raw inside worn sandals. By the end of the day, your hands are gritty, your hair is gritty, and when you bite into your evening porridge, you crunch down on you. Guessed it, sand. You're not sure whether you swallowed it from the wind or your own dirty fingers. But at this point, your body is probably part dune. The priests, of course, have a poetic explanation. They claim the sand is the desert's way of humbling mortals, reminding them that order must be fought for daily. To you, it feels less like cosmic symbolism and more like unpaid labor. You sweep, the wind laughs, and the temple fills again. Sometimes, after hours of work, you step back and admire the gleaming courtyard. Momentarily free of dust, the floor shines, the air feels lighter, and you allow yourself a flicker of pride. Then a single gust blows through, scattering grit across the stones like mocking applause. All your effort undone in seconds. The desert doesn't care about pride. The desert always wins. In the end, sweeping sand out of a desert temple isn't maintenance. It's performance art, futile, endless, and required daily. The priests call it devotion. You call it chasing dunes with a broom, knowing the desert is laughing the whole time. The priests love to praise the silence of Thoth's moon temple. They describe it as sacred, a holy quiet where wisdom flows like the Nile at flood. To them, silence is proof that the gods are listening. But to you, silence isn't peaceful. It's loud in all the wrong ways. In the early hours, when the rituals haven't started and pilgrims haven't arrived, the temple halls feel cavernous and still. Your broom swishes, your sandals scuff the floor, and every tiny sound bounces off the stone walls as though the gods are amplifying your clumsiness. Drop a jar, the whole temple knows. Cough, it echoes like thunder. Even your stomach growls loud enough to feel like blasphemy. Silence doesn't hide mistakes, it magnifies them. And then there's the not-so-silent silence. The air hums with things people pretend not to notice. The flutter of ibis wings overhead, the creak of statues settling, the faint squeak of rats darting behind storerooms. Pilgrims claim they hear divine whispers in the stillness. You just hear rodents plotting their next raid on the grain jars. The priests can sit in meditation for hours, basking in what they call spiritual quiet. You don't have that luxury. You're sweeping sand, hauling water, polishing lamps. Every scrape of your rag against stone, every splash of a sloshed jar, feels like an interruption to the cosmic hush. They tell you to work silently, but silence and labor don't mix. Try lifting an amphora without grunting once you'll strain your back before you impress a god. And silence plays tricks. After hours alone in the halls, you start to hear things. A sigh where no one stands, a shuffle in an empty corner, a whisper curling through incense smoke. Is it the gods speaking? Or just your tired mind making patterns out of echoes? You'll never know. What you do know is that when the priests say the temple is a place of serenity, they're not the ones cleaning in the dark, wondering if that creak behind them was divine or just another rat. Even worse, silence follows you outside. The desert itself presses against the temple with its vast, empty hush. The wind carries no voices, just sand and stillness, as though the whole world is holding its breath. To pilgrims, it feels mystical. To you, it feels heavy, like a weight settling on your chest. By the time the rituals begin and chanting fills the halls, you almost feel relief. The noise drowns out the buzzing in your head, replaces the accusing echoes with something structured. For a moment, you can hide inside the sound. Then, of course, the incense burns your eyes, the drums shake your bones, and you remember that quiet or loud, the temple never really leaves you at peace. In Thoth's moon temple, silence isn't golden. It's a burden, one that listens too closely, judges too sharply, and never actually shuts up. If the moon temple has one inexhaustible resource, it isn't incense or oil. It's the priests' voices. They never stop using them. Chanting, praying, lecturing, reciting every hour of the day is filled with words spilling from their mouths like an unbroken river. They don't just love Thoth's wisdom. They love hearing themselves say it. Morning rituals begin with drawn-out hymns. Not short hymns, either long, winding verses about moonlight, balance, and the endless brilliance of the gods. They echo through the halls as you shuffle behind them with baskets of offerings. The priests sway dramatically, arms lifted, their voices trembling with emotion. Meanwhile, your arms tremble for a different reason. You've been holding a tray of beer jars so long your elbows feel like snapped reeds. When the rituals end, the speeches begin. Priests adore making speeches. They corner pilgrims in the courtyards, declaiming about purity, discipline, and wisdom as though they're the first to think of it. Pilgrims nod dutifully, overwhelmed by the booming tone and flowery words. You nod too, but only because you're fighting off sleep while sweeping around their sandals. And the volume gods. The volume. Priests don't speak, they project. Every word must reach the farthest corner of the hall, even if they're only speaking to 3 people standing directly in front of them. The result is that your ears ring with sermons you never asked for, like you're living inside a human drum. Even in private chambers, they mutter prayers under their breath, practicing lines for the next ritual. Silence is a concept they've clearly never met. The worst part is their timing. Just when you think you'll get a moment of rest, another priest launches into a lecture, maybe about the phases of the moon, maybe about how servants should be more diligent. The topic doesn't matter. What matters is that you're stuck listening, because walking away would be disrespectful. So you stand there nodding, while sweat drips down your back, dreaming of anywhere that doesn't involve someone shouting metaphors about lunar wisdom. Of course, the priests insist their voices are instruments of the divine. They claim Thoth speaks through them, that every syllable is a fragment of eternal knowledge. But if eternal knowledge sounds like balance is the key, repeated for the 10th time that morning, you're not impressed. If Thoth really is speaking, he's starting to sound like a broken drum. And yet, pilgrims hang on every word. They bow, weep, and thank the priests for their profound wisdom. Nobody ever thanks the servant who stood through the entire monologue while balancing a tray of figs and trying not to collapse. You're invisible in their theater, just part of the scenery. By the end of the day, your head is stuffed with words you didn't want, like a storage jar overflowing with stale grain. The priests finish their final chant with trembling voices, proud of their devotion. You finish sweeping the last of the fig skins, proud you managed not to scream during the 20th speech about moonlight. If there is one battlefield where you fight most often, it isn't with pilgrims, animals, or priests, it's with the floors. The moon temple is nothing but floor. Long corridors of polished limestone, vast courtyards paved in smooth blocks, stairways stretching toward the sanctum. Every surface is expected to gleam, because apparently the gods of wisdom can't function if there's a little dirt underfoot. You sweep, scrub, polish, and repeat, as though cleanliness itself is the true offering to Thoth. The trouble is, those floors are cursed. They attract dirt faster than you can banish it. Pilgrims stomp across them with dusty sandals. Priests trail robes dipped in incense ash. Sacred animals prance over them, leaving droppings, feathers, and the occasional claw mark. It's less a holy walkway and more a conveyor belt for grime. Scrubbing is its own kind of torment. Limestone doesn't forgive. It stains from spilled oil, scratches from dragged baskets, chips when a heavy jar topples. You're on your knees with sand and water, grinding away at stubborn marks while your back spasms. The priests walk past, nodding at your diligence, but never slowing down enough to actually help. They'll notice one faint streak you missed, though, and make sure you hear about it in full poetic lecture form. Polishing is worse. After hours of hauling rags in circles, your arms feel like lead. The floor gleams briefly, catching torchlight in a mirror shine. It's almost beautiful, you almost feel proud. Then, just as quickly, someone drops a fig or tracks mud straight through the sanctum, and the shine is gone. Your work is invisible, undone in seconds, but you still have to repeat it tomorrow. And the floors are enormous. The temple wasn't built for servants' convenience. It was built to impress pilgrims. Every courtyard stretches wider than your patience. Every hallway feels like it's 3 times longer when you're bent over with a broom. The more the priests brag about the temple's grandeur, the more you wonder how much less of it you'd have to clean if the architect had been a little less ambitious. But the insult that stings most isn't the dirt, it's the credit. Priests will stand in glowing halls and thank Thoth for blessing the temple with purity. Pilgrims will marvel at the spotless stones, whispering about divine radiance. Nobody mentions the servant with aching arms who spent hours on hands and knees to create that illusion of heavenly cleanliness. To them, the shine is proof of God's. To you, it's proof that your sweat is invisible. When you finally pause, rag in hand, staring at the stones reflecting torchlight like calm water, you do feel something close to awe. Not at the gods, not at the priests, but at your own persistence. The floor might be filthy again tomorrow, but tonight, for a brief, fragile moment, it gleams because of you. If there is one object you grow to despise more than any other in Thoth's moon temple, it's the water jar. They're everywhere, lining storerooms, stacked in corners, perched in shrines, clutched by thirsty priests. Each one seems heavier than the last, and somehow it always falls to you to carry them. The temple runs on water as much as it does incense. Ritual baths, cleansing the floors, filling basins, mixing offerings. Even just keeping the priests refreshed, all of it demands jars upon jars of water. The Nile may be generous, but the temple isn't exactly next door. That means endless trips, hauling clay amphorae sloshing with precious liquid, your shoulders biting under the rope straps, your feet dragging over the same stone stairs again and again. The jars are treacherous things, too full, and they slosh, splattering your tunic and leaving you smelling like river mud. Too light, and priests complain you didn't bring enough. The handles chip, the rims crack, the bases scrape your legs raw. You learn quickly how much clay can bruise when it slams against your shin. Worst of all, they're fragile. Drop one jar and the sound of shattering echoes like thunder. You'll be scolded for waste, blamed for disrespect, and left to mop up the muddy mess, while everyone else pretends they've never broken anything in their lives. And the weight, gods. The weight. Each amphora feels like lifting the moon itself, especially when you're climbing the temple steps. The sun bakes your back, the straps cut your shoulders, and your arms go numb. Yet somehow you're expected to keep moving, smiling humbly, as though you're honored to provide holy hydration. Pilgrims might see you trudging past, staggering under clay jars, and assume you're participating in a sacred ritual. The truth is far less glamorous. You're just carrying someone else's bathwater. The priests love their water pure, fresh, and plentiful. They never consider the effort it takes to fetch it. They dip their hands into basins with serene faces, praising Thoth for divine clarity. They don't thank you for the aching muscles it took to haul it there. If they notice your sweat dripping into the basin, they simply declare it another impurity you've caused. And of course, water spills. Always. A misstep on the stairs, a pilgrim bumping into you, a goat darting across the courtyard. Suddenly half your jar is gone, soaking the ground. You'll be sent back instantly. No excuses, because the rituals can't wait for clumsy servants. Every mistake doubles your labor. Sometimes, at dusk, when you've hauled what feels like the Nile itself through the temple, you watch the priests pour the water over statues or dump it into drains after cleansing. All that effort, hours of toil gone in seconds. The water is holy. Your backache is not. In the Moon Temple, wisdom flows like water, which sounds poetic, until you realize you're the one dragging every drop of it uphill in jars that never get lighter. If you thought the priests liked the sound of their own voices during speeches, wait until you hear their chanting. It never stops. Morning, noon, evening, midnight, there's always someone droning in the background, keeping the temple wrapped in a low, constant hum of devotion. The priests say it keeps Thoth's wisdom alive in every corner. You say it keeps you one step away from madness. The rhythm is the same every time. Long, drawn-out syllables, stretched like taffy, rising and falling in patterns you've memorized against your will. After a while, you can't tell if you're hearing actual chanting or if your brain has just started playing it on loop. Even when you lie down in the servant quarters, the sound echoes in your skull, a phantom chorus that refuses to quit. And chanting isn't soft. It's loud, deliberate, designed to reverberate against stone walls. Every note rattles in your chest, whether you're in the sanctum or scrubbing floors 3 halls away. You can't escape it. Incense smoke curls into your eyes, drums boom in the background, and over it all comes the relentless drone of men who genuinely believe the gods are impressed by volume. Chanting also means work for you. Someone has to refill the incense, adjust the lamps, replace the food offerings, and sweep the ashes that fall during the ritual, while the priests chant for hours. You're running errands in circles, making sure nothing breaks the holy flow. If a lamp sputters out, you're blamed for disturbing harmony. If an offering goes missing, probably eaten by a baboon, you're accused of negligence. All while your ears ring with hymns about cosmic balance. Pilgrims love the chanting. They sway, clap, and sometimes even join in, their voices adding to the cacophony. To them, it's uplifting. To you, it's just more noise. Another layer of sound piled onto your exhaustion. The more voices, the harder it is to think. You can't even plan your chores in peace, because the constant hum swallows every thought like sand swallowing footprints. There's also no such thing as a short chant. Each session stretches endlessly, broken only by brief pauses when the priests sip water or adjust their robes. You think it's over, and then no, they've just started a new verse, one even longer than the last. Hours vanish in that rhythm, hours you could have spent resting. By the time the final syllable fades, you're half asleep on your broom. And yet, after all that effort, the temple doesn't sound transformed. It just sounds tired. The priests declare the night successful. Pilgrims murmur, thanks, and you stand in the shadows with your ears still buzzing, knowing tomorrow you'll hear the exact same chants, in the exact same order, for the exact same reasons. You don't need divine wisdom to know what comes next. More voices, more smoke, more endless echoes. The chants might end on paper, but for you they never stop. If there's one thing the Moon Temple never lacks, it's food. Loaves of bread, jars of honey, dates, figs, fish, even roasted geese, all piled high on altars as offerings to the gods. Every day, pilgrims bring their best, placing it in front of Thoth statues, bowing low, and whispering prayers. To them, the offerings are gifts of gratitude. To you, they're a cruel display of meals you'll never touch. The priests oversee the process with solemn faces. They bless the food, wave incense over it, and declare it accepted by divine powers. And once the rituals end, the offerings are removed, but not by you. Oh no. Priests swoop in first, choosing the finest pieces for themselves. The rest is either distributed among higher-ranking temple staff or stored away for later feasts. Servants like you are expected to look but not taste, haul but not eat. Hunger gnaws at your belly while your arms carry trays stacked with figs you'll never bite. What makes it worse is the smell. Fresh bread still warm from the oven, honey glistening in the sun, roasted meat filling the halls with mouth-watering smoke. It lingers in the air as you sweep, scrub, and haul. You inhale deeply, half dizzy from the sweetness, your stomach growling loud enough to rival the chants. Pilgrims call the aroma heavenly. You call it torture. Sometimes the food spoils before the priests get to it. Heat and flies don't care about divinity. Loaves go hard, fruit rots, fish turns sour. When that happens, the offerings are carted off to be buried, tossed to animals, or quietly thrown out. Not given to the servants who actually carried them, of course. Better to waste them than risk breaking the illusion of sacred generosity. Watching perfectly good food sink into the sand while you chew stale porridge at night is a bitterness that no prayer can sweeten. And offerings aren't just food. Pilgrims bring oils, perfumes, even beer. The beer is poured into basins, foaming golden under the torchlight, smelling like relief on a hot day. But it isn't poured for you. It's poured for statues that never drink. Later, priests scoop up what's left for themselves, leaving you with the privilege of cleaning sticky residue off the floor. You'd think, after hauling countless trays, you'd grow numb to it. But hunger has no patience for repetition. Every platter feels personal. Every gleaming date looks like a temptation carved just for you. The gods never seem to notice if one fig is missing, but the priests do, and their punishments are swift. So you carry the trays faithfully, your hands full, your stomach empty. The irony isn't lost on you. You feed the gods with food you'll never taste, quench their thirst with drink you'll never sip, and clean the leftovers with a hunger that never fades. Pilgrims call it devotion. Priests call it order. You call it the longest-running joke you're not allowed to laugh at. For all their talk about divine order and eternal wisdom, the priests of Thoth's moon temple seem to rely on tools that fall apart at the worst possible moments. Everything in the temple has to be sacred. Sacred brooms, sacred knives, sacred jars, sacred ladles. But sacred doesn't mean sturdy. In fact, most of it is fragile, chipped, or held together with more hope than clay. Take the ceremonial knives. They're supposed to be flawless, ritually pure, sharpened with chants under the moonlight. In reality, they nick and bend after a few uses. You're the one tasked with polishing them back to a shine. Careful not to slice your fingers. But no matter how well you clean them, one wrong move during a sacrifice, and suddenly the priest is glaring at you as though your polishing technique offended the gods. Then there are the offering bowls. Carved from stone, they look impressive until you try carrying them. Heavy enough to bruise your arms, slippery enough to crash onto the floor, they always seem to crack when handled by a servant. Somehow, when a priest drops one, it's called a sign from Thoth. When you drop one, it's carelessness. Guess who gets stuck cleaning the shards either way? The sacred ladles aren't much better. Used to scoop oil or beer. They're made of bronze, polished so thin they bend if you breathe too hard on them. Spill even a drop while using one, and you're accused of disrespecting the gods. Never mind that the ladle itself looks ready to snap in half with the next scoop. And don't get started on the brooms. Yes, even brooms are sacred. Woven from reeds, gathered in special ways, sprinkled with incense smoke, blessed under moonlight, none of which prevents them from shedding bristles constantly. You sweep the floor once and leave behind a trail of broken reeds, meaning you now have two messes instead of one. Yet the priests insist they're holy instruments of cleanliness, as though the gods would fall silent if you used a sturdier broom. Every tool comes with rules. Don't touch it without washing first. Don't place it on the ground. Don't use it outside the ritual hall. And of course, if it breaks, don't throw it away. Bury it with ceremonies, chanting, and incense. Which means you, the servant, dig the hole, carry the broken piece, and listen to a priest drone about how even tools pass into the afterlife. Meanwhile, you're wondering how long before the replacement breaks in the exact same way. It's a strange sort of devotion, surrounding yourself with objects that are fragile by design. Maybe the fragility is the point, a reminder that mortals are clumsy and the gods are picky. Or maybe it's just bad craftsmanship passed off as holiness. Either way, you're the one carrying cracked bowls, bent knives, and brooms that collapse mid-sweep. The priests may call them sacred instruments. You just call them accidents waiting to happen. If you ever wondered what eternity smells like, the answer is incense. Thick, smoky, and inescapable. It lingers in every hall of the Moon Temple, saturating robes, walls, and lungs alike. The priests say the gods adore it. You're less convinced. After hours of breathing it in, you feel less holy and more like a fish slowly being smoked over a fire. Incense is burned constantly, morning rituals, evening chants, special feasts, and even in the middle of the night when some priest decides the gods require a midnight top-up, the brazier is never cold. As a servant, you're tasked with fetching the resin, grinding it, lighting it, and keeping the smoke rising evenly. Too little, and the priests accuse you of laziness. Too much, and you choke everyone in the hall, which ironically still ends with you being blamed. The smoke clings to everything. Your tunic reeks of it, no matter how often you wash. Your hair traps it, so you smell like incense even when you're hauling water outside the temple. Your skin absorbs it, until you wonder if your sweat now comes with hints of myrrh. Pilgrims may find the scent heavenly, but for you, it's a perfume that refuses to wash off. And incense isn't cheap. It's imported, guarded, and rationed carefully. Priests handle the measuring, but you're the one who grinds it into powder with aching arms. The resin sticking to your fingers like glue. Try prying hardened lumps from a mortar after hours of grinding, and you'll realize the true cost isn't gold, it's your knuckles. There's also the matter of breathing. Hours in those smoke-filled halls leave your chest heavy, your throat raw, your eyes watering. You cough quietly, hoping the priests don't hear. They frown upon servants breaking the solemn atmosphere with human weakness. They can chant through clouds of incense without flinching. But then again, they're not the ones scrubbing soot out of their lungs every night. Even when the braziers finally die down, the scent doesn't vanish. It seeps into the stones, lingers in the courtyards, follows you into the servant quarters. You close your eyes, hoping for the neutral smell of desert air. But all you get is incense, eternal and unshakable. Sleep becomes another ritual, performed under a haze of smoke. Some claim the gods truly dwell in the incense, that the curling trails are their whispers rising toward the sky. You've watched enough of it burn to know the truth. The only thing rising is your headache. And yet, every day you grind, light, and fan the braziers, keeping the smoke alive because someone higher up says the gods can't live without it. Maybe they're right. Maybe the gods do love incense. But if wisdom smells like this, then wisdom also stings your eyes, dries your throat, and sticks to your skin no matter how hard you scrub. If there's one thing pilgrims bring with them besides dust and noise, it's questions. Endless questions. They arrive in the temple with wide eyes, eager to be enlightened, and they never stop asking. Priests encourage it. Of course, it makes them look wise. But servants like you get caught in the crossfire, expected to know everything without actually being allowed to answer. Where does Thoth sit when he visits? A pilgrim once asked you, as if you kept a chair reserved for the god of wisdom. Another wanted to know why the moon looked bigger on some nights, as though you personally arranged the sky. Some even ask practical things, like where the water jars are filled, or how many steps lead to the sanctum. If you speak, you're scolded for overstepping your role. If you stay silent, you're scolded for rudeness. There's no winning. The worst part is their persistence. Pilgrims repeat questions endlessly, hoping for answers they like better. What happens if Thoth doesn't like my offering? What if the ibis statue is staring at me? What does this hieroglyph mean? The priests can only answer so many before slipping away to meditate. That leaves you, broom in hand, pretending you're deaf while being trailed through the courtyard by someone who thinks you're secretly holding cosmic secrets. Pilgrims also have no sense of timing. They'll stop you mid-task, peppering you with questions while your arms are full of offerings, or you're balancing an oil jar. Drop something, and suddenly it's your fault for being clumsy, not theirs for distracting you. They don't see you as a worker. They see you as a walking information tablet, available at all hours, whether you like it or not. And the questions aren't just about the temple. Some pilgrims unload their entire lives on you, asking what dreams mean, whether their crops will grow, or if the gods are angry about that goat they forgot to sacrifice last year. You're not a priest, not an oracle, not even remotely qualified, but you're standing there, which apparently makes you responsible for their spiritual anxieties. Of course, you can't dismiss them. Pilgrims bring gifts, and gifts keep the temple running. Annoying them would be dishonoring Thoth. So you nod politely, bite your tongue, and let priests swoop in at the last moment to deliver grand answers, usually the same recycled wisdom you've heard 100 times. The pilgrim leaves satisfied. The priest looks brilliant, and you're left wondering why nobody ever questions who cleaned the floor they're standing on. By the time evening falls, you've been asked enough questions to fill a scroll. Not one of them was directed at you for your own sake, only as a way to reach someone else. And that's the bitter truth. Pilgrims don't see you as a person, just another tool in the temple, another path to wisdom you're never allowed to share. The Moon Temple prides itself on its statues, towering ibises, looming baboons, and a dozen variations of Thoth himself, carved in stone or cast in bronze. They dominate the halls, gazing down with that permanent air of judgment only gods can wear. Pilgrims see wisdom in those faces. You see dust, endless, stubborn dust. Cleaning these statues is one of your regular tasks, though calling it cleaning is generous. It's more like a war. Each figure stands taller than you, often twice your height, meaning every wipe requires ladders, ropes, or precarious balancing acts. You climb with rags and jars of water, heart thudding as your foot slips against polished stone, trying not to imagine yourself tumbling down in front of an audience of wide-eyed pilgrims. The dust itself is relentless. No matter how often you scrub, a new layer settles overnight, carried in by desert winds. The priests blame you if it's visible, claiming the gods grow displeased when their images aren't spotless. Never mind that the desert has been dusting statues long before you existed. Somehow, it's still your fault, and dust isn't the only enemy. Birds like to perch on the heads of sacred figures, leaving behind messes that feel anything but divine. The bronze baboon especially seems to attract them. You climb up to wipe the statue's crown, only to be greeted by feathers, droppings, and the faint smell of something that once resembled a fish. Yet when the statue gleams again, pilgrims call it a miracle, not the result of your sore arms and ruined rags. Reaching the intricate carvings is even worse. The folds of Thoth's robes, the curve of his beak, the hieroglyphs etched into his throne dust hides in every crevice. You scrape with brushes until your hands cramp, trying to dislodge grains too stubborn to move. If one speck remains, priests lean in dramatically during ceremonies, frowning as if you've personally insulted divine order. Sometimes, you pause mid-task and actually look at the statues. They're magnificent, yes, but also oppressive. Their eyes never blink, their faces never soften. When you're alone in the hall, standing halfway up a ladder, it feels like they're watching, waiting for you to slip. Pilgrims say, the gods speak through these figures. If that's true, the only message you ever hear is, work harder. The cruelest part is that your effort rarely lasts. You scrub for hours, polish until the stone shines like water under moonlight, and step back, feeling almost satisfied. Then the doors open, the wind rushes in, and another veil of dust scatters across the statues before your cloth is even dry. The cycle begins again, endless as the desert. The priests declare the statues eternal symbols of divine wisdom. For you, they're just towering reminders that no matter how high you climb, you'll never get ahead of the dust. If there is one thing the priests of Thoth's Moon Temple never rush, it's a ritual. They stretch each one until it feels less like devotion and more like punishment, though. Of course, the punishment is yours, not theirs. Rituals begin simply enough. A few chants, some incense, a basin of water. You think it will be manageable. Then the priests add another verse, another offering, another round of chanting. Before you know it, the ritual has doubled in length. You shift from one aching foot to the other, carrying trays, refilling lamps, and pretending you aren't secretly counting how many times they've repeated the same prayer. The worst part is the unpredictability. Rituals never end when they're supposed to. A cloud crossing the moon might prompt the priests to restart. A pilgrim sneezes, and suddenly they must purify the space again. Someone spills a drop of oil, and the entire sequence is repeated from the beginning. The gods, it seems, demand perfection, which means hours of work redone because of mistakes you probably didn't even make. Pilgrims watch with rapture, their eyes wide, their bodies swaying to the rhythm. They have the luxury of awe. You don't. While they're marveling at the spectacle, You're slipping behind the scenes to fetch more resin, mop spills, and replace offerings that have already spoiled under the heat. The priests wave their arms dramatically, voices trembling with passion, while you crawl on your knees trying to scrub soot from the floor before it stains permanently, and the rituals aren't quiet. Drums pound, sistrums rattle. Voices rise in booming chants that echo endlessly in the stone halls. After hours, the sound drills into your skull, vibrating through your bones. You begin to lose track of what's being said. It blurs into noise, one long hum of repetition. Yet if you dare look tired, someone notices, and suddenly you're accused of irreverence. Even the offerings add to your suffering. Loaves of bread harden under the heat, wine jars topple, and animals brought for sacrifice bleat endlessly, filling the background with noise that's anything but holy. It all has to be managed discreetly, because if the pilgrims see the chaos, the illusion of divine order collapses. Guess who keeps that illusion alive? Not the priests. And then there's the sheer length. Rituals last from sunrise to noon, from noon to dusk, sometimes even spilling into the night. Your arms grow numb, your back aches, and your eyelids sag. But there is no leaving early. Priests can slip out to prepare or pray. Servants, you stay until the last ember dies and the last chant fades. When it finally ends, the priests raise their hands triumphantly, declaring balance restored, wisdom honored, and the gods appeased. Pilgrims cheer. You're left with bruised knees, a broom dripping with ash, and the knowledge that tomorrow they'll do it all again, longer, louder, and just as exhausting. If there's one sound you dread more than chanting, it's the hiss of a dying lamp. The moon temple runs on light, and every flickering flame is considered sacred. Which means, if a lamp sputters, you run. Servants like you spend half the day refilling clay lamps with oil, trimming wicks, and praying they last through yet another endless ritual. The problem is the lamps never cooperate. They burn too quickly, spilling smoke into the hall. They crack from the heat, spilling oil across the floor. Sometimes they simply gutter out with no warning, leaving you to scramble through the haze with a jar of oil before a priest notices. When one fails, it's treated like a cosmic insult, not to the gods, of course directly to you. The work is repetitive and sticky. Oil sloshes over your hands, slicking your tunic, soaking into your skin until you smell like an olive grove. No matter how often you scrub, the scent lingers. Your fingers glisten, your sandals slip, and your tools stick to your palms. Pilgrims think the shimmering lamps are beautiful. They don't see the trail of stains you leave behind trying to keep them burning. And oil is precious. Priests guard it like treasure, measuring out portions with theatrical care. Yet when the lamps burn low, you're the one blamed for using too little. If they smoke and blacken the walls, you're accused of using too much. Somehow, the gods are never at fault, it's always your clumsy hands that disturb the balance. Lamps are scattered everywhere, along corridors, in shrines, on altars, by doorways. Each one must glow steadily, no exceptions. That means endless walking, jar of oil in hand, up and down stairs, through hall after hall, until you feel like you're chasing shadows. Just when you think you've finished, another lamp flickers, demanding your attention like a spoiled child. The priests, of course, treat the lamps as symbols of divine wisdom. They wax poetic about flames as knowledge, light as order, oil as purity. But when a lamp dies mid-sermon, their grand metaphors collapse. They glare at you until you scurry forward, relighting it with trembling hands, pretending your heart isn't pounding at the thought of dropping the jar in front of 100 pilgrims. And lamps are fragile. One careless elbow, one clumsy bump, and a lamp shatters across the floor, oil spreading like a dark stain. Then comes the frantic cleanup, sweeping shards, soaking oil, hiding the mess before the crowd notices. To the priests, it's a minor inconvenience. To you, it's hours of work undone in seconds. You sometimes wonder if the lamps are mocking you, burning lower just as you pass, demanding more oil, more care, more of your strength. They are small, delicate things, yet they command your every step. The priests see lamps as symbols of eternal light. You see them for what they are, fragile mouths that never stop drinking. The walls of Thoth's moon temple are covered in hieroglyphs, rows upon rows of carved signs, every surface etched with prayers, wisdom, and warnings. Pilgrims marvel at them, tracing the symbols with their fingers, whispering about the power they hold. The truth is, those hieroglyphs don't just sit there forever. They fade, they chip, they crumble. And when they do, it's your job to repaint them. It sounds noble, restoring sacred texts, preserving wisdom for future generations. But in practice, it's tedious, messy, and backbreaking. You crouch against cold stone, brush in hand, dipping into ink that smells sharp and metallic. Each stroke has to be precise. Too heavy, and the paint bleeds. Too light, and the priest claims you're dishonoring Thoth with weak lines. Every sign must look exactly as it did centuries ago, because heaven forbid the god of writing accept a hieroglyph that isn't identical to the last. And the priests watch, always. They hover behind you, pointing out mistakes you haven't even made yet. A little sharper there. More curve here. No, that angle is wrong. Their own hands remain conspicuously clean while yours cramp from holding the brush for hours. If they truly cared about accuracy, they could repaint the walls themselves. But no, they leave the honor to you, as if scrubbing paint into stone is a spiritual privilege. The work is unforgiving. The walls are tall, the carvings deep, and the spaces between symbols filled with dust that has to be cleaned before painting. You spend more time scraping grime out of grooves than actually applying paint. By the end of the day, your tunic is streaked with ink, your fingers stained black, your knees aching from kneeling against stone. Pilgrims might admire the symbols, but they never notice the streak of sweat you left behind in the process. And then there's the futility. No matter how carefully you repaint, the desert doesn't care. Sandstorms wear the color down, moisture makes it flake, and time erases it all again. Within months, you'll be back in the same hall, restoring the same lines you restored before. The priests call it devotion. You call it erasing and rewriting the same scroll forever. Sometimes, though, you pause and actually look at what you're painting. A falcon rising, a crescent moon, a reed pen poised in a god's hand. The stories are beautiful, even if the labor isn't. You wonder who carved them first, long before you were born, and whether they knew someone like you would one day be crawling along the walls to keep their work alive. Still, the beauty doesn't outweigh the ache. Once the paint dries, the priests praise the gods for their eternal wisdom. They never praise the servant whose hand shook for hours to make sure the gods looked eternal. Temples love their sacred animals. In Thoth's case, that means ibises and baboons, both considered living symbols of divine wisdom. To the priests, they are holy creatures, walking embodiments of the god himself. To you, they are noisy, messy, and nearly impossible to manage. Take the ibises. They strut through the courtyards like feathered royalty, pecking at anything that glitters and leaving trails of droppings on the very floors you just finished scrubbing. Pilgrims gasp in awe when they spread their wings, claiming it's a sign of blessing. You're the one with a rag, wiping the blessing off limestone steps. And then there are the baboons. Sacred or not, they have the temperament of spoiled children and the strength of grown men. They climb statues, knock over offering bowls, steal food from trays, and shriek loud enough to drown out chanting. Pilgrims laugh nervously, pretending it's all part of the ritual. You're the one chasing a baboon with half a loaf of sacred bread in its teeth, while priests scold you for letting it happen in the first place. Feeding them is a nightmare. The animals expect the best fresh figs, fine grains, dates sweet enough to make your own mouth water. The priests insist it must be so, claiming the gods would be offended if their chosen creatures dined on anything less. But servants like you never see a crumb of that luxury. You carry it in golden bowls, watch it vanish into beaks and jaws, and return to your own thin porridge when night falls. And animals don't care about rituals. While priests recite solemn verses, the ibises flap noisily, knocking into braziers, scattering embers. While incense drifts gracefully through the air, a baboon decides to climb the offering table, scattering loaves and figs across the floor. Every disruption is blamed on servants. Never mind that no one can predict what a baboon will do with a head full of mischief and teeth sharp enough to ruin your day. The smell is another misery. Incense may mask it, but you know it's there. The musk of animals penned in courtyards, mixed with the droppings you sweep away at dawn. Pilgrims, lost in reverence, rarely notice, but you do. Every step reminds you that, sacred or not, animals are animals, and animals are messy. Yet, for all the chaos, no one dares treat them like anything less than divine. An ibis perched on a priest's shoulder is called a sign of favor. A baboon stealing fruit is said to be choosing its share of wisdom. These poetic excuses sound fine, until you're the one scrubbing up after them. The priests may see holiness in feathers and fur. You mostly see claws, noise, and more chores than you can possibly finish. If there is a sound that cuts through your bones worse than chanting or drums, it's the bells. The priests use them for everything, calling pilgrims to gather, announcing rituals, marking the moon's rise, or simply because someone decided the gods needed more noise. Every corner of the temple seems to have a bell waiting to be struck, and every strike means more work for you. The bells are never subtle. Some are bronze, polished until they gleam, their tones echoing across the courtyards like thunder. Others are smaller, carried by priests on cords, jingling with every exaggerated gesture. The sound is sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. It jolts you from sleep, interrupts meals, and makes even moments of silence feel temporary. There is no peace when bells exist, and they always signal something inconvenient. A bell rings, and suddenly you're hauling offerings. Another clang, and you're rushing to relight lamps. A longer peal means more chanting, more incense, more standing at attention, while your knees beg for rest. The bells don't just measure time, they steal it from you, breaking the day into endless fragments of interrupted chores. The worst are the emergency bells. A priest trips over his robe, or a flame sputters out, and the bell rings furiously as if the temple itself were collapsing. You sprint in panic, jar of oil or broom in hand, only to find a small inconvenience turned into a cosmic drama. The priests insist it's necessary after all. The gods demand swift response. To you, it feels like a bad habit no one wants to break. Even when the bells aren't calling you directly, they fill the air. Pilgrims flinch at the sudden clangs, then settle into reverence, convinced they've witnessed something holy. You know better. The bells are simply another tool to remind everyone that priests control the rhythm of life inside these walls. Each chime says, "Stop what you're doing, pay attention, and obey." Maintaining the bells is also your job. They tarnish quickly, the bronze going dull under desert air. You polish them until your arms ache, scrubbing out soot and bird droppings, making sure they shine enough to blind the next pilgrim who dares look too closely. You're the one climbing ladders to dust the larger ones, wiping away cobwebs while the rope tangles around your wrists. The priests claim the bells carry divine sound. You know they also carry spiders, and the irony is, the bells never ring for you. They don't mark the end of your chores, or the rare moment when you can rest. They only ever demand more, pulling you back to service again and again. For pilgrims, the bells symbolize sacred order. For you, they're a constant reminder that your day doesn't belong to you. It belongs to whoever has the strength to pull a rope. Every temple treasures its scrolls, and Thoth's moon temple more than most. Shelves upon shelves hold papyri filled with hymns, rituals, and wisdom said to come directly from the god of writing himself. Pilgrims look at them with awe, imagining secret knowledge locked away in neat black ink. Priests speak about them reverently, treating each as if it were the spine of the universe. And you're the one dusting them without being allowed to know a single word. The rule is clear. Servants may carry scrolls, clean shelves, even repair broken bindings, but never read them. The priests claim this is for your protection. Wisdom, they say, is too heavy a burden for ordinary people. The truth is simpler. Knowledge is power, and they aren't about to share it with someone who spends their days hauling water. So you move through the archive halls, arms full of sacred texts, resisting the temptation to glance at the ink. It isn't easy. The scrolls whisper. When you unroll one to check for insect damage or dust, rows of symbols stretch before you, crisp and careful. The signs call out, daring you to follow their lines. You can't help but wonder, is this one a hymn to the moon, a recipe for ink, or some grand secret about the afterlife? You'll never know, because if you linger even a moment too long, a priest's shadow falls over you, and suddenly you're reminded of your place. The hypocrisy stings. Priests claim to be guardians of knowledge, but most of them simply recite the same passages again and again, dressing up old words in new tones. You suspect some couldn't explain half of what they chant, yet they stand before pilgrims with scrolls unfurled, basking in the glow of mystery, while you stand behind them with an armful of dust rags. Scroll maintenance itself is exhausting. The papyri crack in the dry air, so you're tasked with moistening storage rooms, chasing away insects, and patching tears with sticky resin. A single slip of your hand can ruin lines written decades ago, and if that happens, the priests don't blame time, they blame you. And then there's the irony. Thoth is supposed to be the god of wisdom, teaching humanity the art of writing. Yet here you are, a human surrounded by writing, forbidden from even sounding out a single sign. The knowledge exists within reach, yet it might as well be carved into the moon itself. Pilgrims assume you're fortunate to live among the scrolls. They don't realize it's like standing outside a banquet hall with your stomach empty, hearing laughter but never invited inside. So you dust, patch, and carry, always careful never to let your eyes linger too long. The priests guard the scrolls as though they belong only to them, but deep down, you know the truth. Wisdom doesn't live on shelves. If it did, your hands would be wiser than theirs. The desert doesn't care about temples. No matter how many walls or gates the priests build, the sand always finds its way inside. It slips under doors, swirls through windows, and drifts into corners like it has a personal vendetta. And guess who fights it every single day? You. Armed with nothing more than a reed broom that sheds faster than it sweeps, you wage a losing battle against the desert itself. Sweeping begins at dawn, before the first pilgrim sets foot in the courtyard. You start at one end, pushing sand into neat little piles, only to turn and see a new layer already creeping across the floor. The wind blows, the doors open, and all your work scatters back into the hall like a cruel joke. Priests call it a test of discipline. You call it a task designed to drive a person insane. The sand gets everywhere. It lodges between the cracks of stone tiles, hides beneath offering tables, and even clings to the bases of statues you just polished. You sweep one section, only to discover it has gathered 3 rooms over. It crunches under your sandals, scratches at your skin, and sneaks into food jars if you aren't careful. Pilgrims talk about the temple as a place of purity. If they ever looked closely, they'd realize they're walking on an endless layer of grit, and the tools don't help. The so-called sacred brooms are fragile, the reeds snapping and scattering across the floor. Half your sweeping ends up being cleaning after the broom itself. You beg for sturdier tools, but the priests insist fragility teaches humility. What it actually teaches is how to sweep the same spot 10 times and still see sand glinting back at you. It isn't just the floors. Sand clogs the hinges of doors, grinds into lamp oil, and coats the steps to the sanctum until they feel like dunes. You're sent with cloths to wipe it all down, kneeling on stone, brushing endlessly until your knees ache. By midday, the wind picks up again, undoing everything in minutes. It's like chasing the tide with a bucket. Pilgrims rarely notice the effort. They marvel at the polished walls and gleaming floors without realizing the cost. Hours of servants bent double, sweeping until their backs scream. They assume the gods keep the temple clean. If only they knew the truth that it's sweat, not divinity, that keeps the place from turning into another sand dune. Sometimes, when the wind howls at night, you wonder if the desert is laughing. Every grain you sweep out returns the next day, multiplied, determined to reclaim what humans have borrowed. The priests see order triumphing over chaos. You know the sand is winning. Slowly, silently, one grain at a time. The moon temple is obsessed with water. Purity, cleansing, rituals, everything needs water, and plenty of it. But temples aren't built next to rivers out of convenience. No, that would make sense. Instead, servants like you must haul heavy clay jars from wells, or from caravans that bring it in. The jars are massive, wide-bellied things designed less for carrying and more for punishing whoever is unlucky enough to lift them. Each jar seems to grow heavier the longer you carry it. The clay digs into your palms, the rim scrapes your arms, and the sloshing inside throws your balance off. with every step. Spill even a drop, and the priests frown, claiming the gods disapprove of waste. Never mind that the jar was filled to the brim and designed to spill in the first place. You're expected to walk like a reed bending gracefully in the wind, not like someone struggling with half your body weight balanced on your hip. The routes are long, from storage rooms to altars, from kitchens to baths. The temple is a maze of steps and corridors. Each trip feels endless, and of course, one jar is never enough. Rituals demand dozens, pilgrims drink their fill, and lamps need topping up. You spend your day in a cycle. Lift, carry, pour, repeat. There's no rhythm to it. No pause. Just the steady drag of clay against skin and the ache settling into your shoulders, and jars break. All it takes is a slip on sand or one clumsy bump against a doorway, and the clay shatters with a sound that freezes everyone. The water floods the floor, soaking into the stone, while priests mutter about omens and waste. The punishment isn't light. They say water is life, but they don't treat the servants hauling it as though they're preserving it only as scapegoats when it's lost. Even when jars survive the journey, storing them is another burden. They're stacked in rows, heavy as statues, and you're tasked with shifting them from one storeroom to another whenever someone decides the gods prefer a different arrangement. It's like playing a game designed to crush your spine. The irony is sharp. Pilgrims see water poured into basins and sprinkled in rituals, sparkling under torchlight, and they gasp in awe. To them, it's divine purity. To you, it's sweat dripping into your eyes as you stagger under a jar too wide to grip properly. They'll never know that their holy water was carried by hands raw with blisters. Sometimes you wonder how much of your life has been spent beneath the weight of clay. Hours blur together, marked only by the sound of sloshing water and your own shallow breaths. The jars feel endless, like they multiply while you sleep. And when the priests declare the temple cleansed and the gods appeased, you can't help but think the jars are the real masters here, silent, heavy, and always demanding to be moved. Temples like to impress. Pilgrims walk in expecting to be dazzled, and the floors are the first thing they see. Smooth stone, polished until it gleams, reflecting lamplight like a shallow pool. They bow, they whisper, they marvel at the craftsmanship. But the truth is, those floors don't shine because of the gods. They shine because servants like you spend hours bent over them, polishing until your arms ache and your knees feel carved from stone. The process isn't simple. You start with sand to scrub out stains, grinding it across the surface until your palms burn. Then you smear oil to bring out the shine, spreading it with rags until the stone glistens. Finally, you buff it with cloth until the floor catches light like glass. It's long, brutal work, and by the end you're sweating so much that your reflection in the stone looks less holy and more exhausted, and the floors are vast. The main halls stretch endlessly, each one wide enough to host 100 pilgrims at once. You polish a section, stand to stretch your back, and look ahead only to see more stone waiting, dull and demanding. No matter how fast you work, the temple always seems to expand under your hands. The irony is sharp. Pilgrims marvel at the shine, believing it's a sign of divine purity. Priests nod solemnly, praising the gods for blessing the temple with light. No one ever says, "Thank the servant who spent 12 hours crawling across the floor with sand and rags." Your sweat is invisible to them, erased the moment the stone gleams. And floors never stay clean. Pilgrims drag in dust. Priests spill oil. Sacred animals leave their mess behind. Every ritual means more stains, more footprints, more ash scattered from braziers. You might polish a hall in the morning only to see it ruined by evening. It's a cycle with no end, as if the gods themselves delight in undoing your work. The priests demand perfection, of course. If even one streak of oil is uneven, they frown. If a pilgrim notices a dull patch, they scold. The shine must be flawless. Not for function but for appearances. They want pilgrims to believe they're walking in a place beyond the ordinary world. That illusion rests entirely on your aching back and raw hands. Sometimes, when you pause to catch your breath, you catch your own reflection in the stone. Bent, tired, blurred by sweat, you look less like a servant and more like a ghost trapped in the floor. The shine that pilgrims praise so highly feels like it swallows you whole, until you're nothing more than another mark erased beneath their feet. The priests call it brilliance. You know it's just polish, hiding all the cracks beneath. Every ritual in the moon temple depends on offerings. Pyramids of bread, bowls of fruit, jars of honey, cuts of meat, all stacked neatly before the gods as proof of devotion. To pilgrims, they're dazzling, a feast laid out for divine eyes. To priests, they're symbolic gifts that carry spiritual weight. To you, they're piles of food that begin to rot almost as soon as they're placed on the altar. The temple is hot, always filled with smoke and bodies. And food doesn't last long in that kind of heat. The bread goes hard within hours. Fruit shrivels, figs split, grapes collapse into sticky mush. Meat attracts flies so quickly it seems like they've been waiting outside the temple doors for the priests to lift the lid. Honey at least holds up, but it drips everywhere, coating bowls and your fingers until they're tacky for the rest of the day. Your job isn't to offer the food that's left to priests in their elaborate chants. Your job is to manage the aftermath. The bread towers that look divine in the morning turn into piles of crumbs by afternoon. You sweep, you scrape, you haul away rotten fruit before pilgrims catch the smell. The priests want the illusion of abundance, not the reality of decay. The cycle is relentless. New offerings arrive daily, carried in baskets from farmers and merchants eager to please the gods. That means new food to arrange, new altars to dress, and new mess to clean. The priests arrange the first few items with grand ceremony, then disappear, leaving you to stack the rest until the altar looks full. If a basket tips or fruit bruises, it's your fault. If a pilgrim notices a fly, it's your fault again. And what happens to the offerings after rituals? They're not left to the gods, they're divided. Priests take their share, sometimes large, sometimes larger, while scraps are tossed to animals or sent to storerooms. Servants rarely see the best of it. You might get a heel of bread if you're lucky, but never the figs or honey. Pilgrims assume the gods consume it in spirit. In truth, the gods consume nothing, you just carry it back and forth until someone else decides it's theirs. The smell is constant. Sweet at first, then sour, then foul. You breathe it in as you sweep, tasting rot on your tongue, trying not to gag. Pilgrims think incense masks everything, but incense only mixes with the stench, leaving the air heavy with sweetness gone wrong. It clings to your skin and hair, following you even after you leave the temple halls. The offerings are supposed to symbolize devotion and eternal cycles. To you, they're reminders of how quickly beauty collapses. Piles of food that begin as holy spectacles and end as just another mess dumped in your hands. Temples pretend to be quiet places. Pilgrims whisper as they step across polished stone, their eyes lifted to the tall ceilings where lamplight flickers. Priests move with deliberate grace, their robes sweeping in soft rhythm, their voices low when they're not chanting. From the outside, the moon temple seems like a sanctuary of silence. But anyone who works inside knows the truth. There is no such thing as true silence here, and whatever scraps of it exist never belong to you. Silence is a performance, carefully staged. When pilgrims enter, the priests want them to feel awe, to believe they've stepped into a realm where the noise of the outside world cannot intrude. But behind the walls, in kitchens, storerooms, and service corridors, life rattles on with endless clatter. Pots bang, jars scrape, brooms swish, and feet shuffle across gritty floors. Servants are the unseen engine keeping everything running, and engines are never silent. Even during rituals, when the hall is supposedly hushed, silence isn't really silence. The air hums with tension. The faint crackle of torches fills the corners, the smoke makes throats itch, and pilgrims cough quietly into their hands. You hear the shuffle of sandals as they shift their weight, the whisper of robes, the creak of wood under strain. You hear the steady drip of oil in lamps, the distant scratching of rodents nesting in corners you're not allowed to chase away during ceremonies. And above all, you hear your own body breath ragged from running, heart pounding from hauling jars or kneeling too long. That sound follows you everywhere, a reminder that while others imagine transcendence, you're grounded firmly in the ache of flesh and bone. The priests guard silence like a treasure, but only for themselves. They demand servants step softly, speak little, and disappear as quickly as possible. If your sandals slap too loudly against the stone, a glare cuts through you like a blade. If a clay jar knocks against another, They mutter about reverence being shattered. They treat silence as their possession. One more thing to control, even though they themselves are constantly breaking it with their chanting, their bells, and their endless speeches. What little silence you find is never yours to enjoy. It arrives late, when the rituals finally die down and the temple empties of pilgrims. By then you're still at work, sweeping ash from braziers, polishing lamps, clearing rotted offerings. The halls stretch out wide and hollow, the echoes of your broom sounding louder than they should. For a fleeting moment, it almost feels like solitude, but you know better. At any time, a priest might appear, demanding more work. The silence belongs to the walls, not to you. Even at night, when the doors are closed, the temple is alive with its own noises. Wind sighs through the gaps in stone, carrying sand that hisses across floors you've just polished. Wooden beams creak in the cool air. Sacred animals shift in their pens, their calls rising suddenly in the darkness. There is always a reminder that the temple is never truly still, and never truly yours to rest in. The greatest irony is that silence is meant to honor Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. But what does silence mean to someone who has no choice but to keep moving, keep working, keep filling the space with the sound of labor? You're told silence is holy, but you are never allowed to enter it. For you, the temple is a place of constant interruption. Bells, orders, footsteps, and chores. And so, when pilgrims sigh in awe at the hush of the temple, you hold your tongue. Let them believe. They'll never hear the silence as you do, a silence that is never restful, never freeing, never truly there. To them, it's proof of the divine. To you, it's just another luxury you'll never be allowed to claim. Because in Thoth's moon temple, even silence has a master.